Okay.
Boom. We're live. Finally, after some technicalities and little issues here and there, we
Yeah, sorry
finally.
about that. Glad we're up and running finally.
Yeah, don't worry about that. I mean, we finally managed to figure it out and make it work. It just sometimes happens. It's technology. All of those things happen, and there's not that much really we could do about that apart from just Skype acting out and not working on your PC. So we figured it out and made it work with your phone. Um, and thankfully we can share a screen as well. So Court, nice to meet you. Talking to you for the first time. I was actually recommended to talk with you by John, who works with Proco, and I looked at your work and was like, damn, I have never considered talking or never considered interviewing someone who does caricature, and I always been interested in how the whole process works and you know where the inspiration is coming from, because it seems to me like a very very different world to what I do, and I'm pretty sure it's very similar or familiar with everything I do anyways. So it's gonna be interesting conversation for sure.
I hope so. I hope not to bore people to death too much here.
Nah, I think we'll be fine. Um, let's maybe start with just introducing, our audience to who you are and what got you into art and what got you interested with pursuing the career you're in right now.
Well, first off, do you want me to try to turn on my camera here while I'm talking? I'm not sure if it's going to work and go to meeting, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
hey, can you see me?
Of course, we should be able to see you. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Oh, great, nice. That's a little more interesting than just hearing me.
Hell yeah.
So, um, yeah, well, I've been doing caricature, illustration, just working professionally for about on my own since 2000 or 2001. Before that, I worked in the theme parks. I learned caricature actually drawing quick sketch caricatures in a live environment, which I think is a great training ground. But a couple years after starting to do that, I got a little bit antsy and wanted to do something more. And I always was interested in portrait art and fine art, and I started taking classes at a really good school here in San Diego called the Watts Atelier,
Mm-hmm.
and they teach traditional art, portraits, figure, landscape, composition, all the stuff you need to actually be a good working artist. And I was real lucky that it was in right in my hometown, and I just took classes there. And after a couple of years there, I started to actually teach as well. They saw my caricature work, and Jeff asked me if I could teach a caricature class, which I did. In the beginning, it was a little shaky. And I mean, I had some experience teaching artists in the theme parks, the quick sketch method, but now I could develop a teaching program of my own for more portrait style caricatures that have more of a realistic feeling, something that where it brings my portrait training together with my caricature training. And yeah, and that's actually where I met Stan Prokopenko, who I now am collaborating with on my caricature instruction videos. He was a student there from a very young age. He took a couple
Mm-hmm.
classes from me, actually. He took my caricature class, and I think features and facial expressions when I taught that.
That's
And
cool.
he's now just excelled to become this just phenomenal artist and teacher
Yeah.
himself. And it's just so fun working with him because he's got this amazing team who make me look really good when they edit it all together and put music and special effects on it. I could not do
they
what he does. I mean, I really use his model, like the stuff, the methods and the style he established when I was creating my own course for Proco.
Nice. Yeah, he definitely gonna make your stuff look more professional than I do with the podcast. But yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I was actually curious where your relationship with Proco came into place, because I actually gonna have him on the stream sometime soon. It's just a matter of finding his time. I know
Mhm.
he's extremely busy. So I've been going with one of his assistants back and forth, trying to figure out when is gonna be the good time to make it happen. Um, but I was curious, like, how do you guys met? And that's actually explains everything at this point. So, um, was
Yeah.
there? I can have this question that is kind of might be kind of weird, but I always wonder, how it goes through for every artist that I talk with. I'm just out of curiosity asking this question that I found almost every artist has a different path, but for me, it's very interesting to find out, was there any defining moment in your life that sort of like set you on the path to be an artist, like something that happened that you felt like, okay, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. I know for some artists it just comes gradually, like you grow into. Uh, I'll tell you personally, for me, the moment when I realized that I want to do it, that I want to work in this industry, I want to do entertainment design and maybe do some illustration work and see where it goes, maybe work for video games and all that stuff, was when I saw uh, a TV commercial for a short film by Tomek Baginski. It was called Cathedral. It was back in 2003 when it was nominated to Academy Award. So I was just like, what is this? What is this beautiful stuff? It's like computer graphics and how people are making it. I was just like got really interested because I used to draw personally, like back of the textbooks at school, and just being generally interested in painting, but never took it too seriously. I usually got into troubles in the school by just drawing some obscene stuff. My mom would get called in like, your son has some issues, I think. So I never took it seriously up until that moment when I have to figure out what exactly that is, and that's where like I went to that rabbit hole of finding out about digital art and how things are done and whatnot. I'm just curious, like how it went down for you. Was it like a defining moment? Did you grow up learning art in general? What was that for you?
Well, I was actually in the parking lot of an art museum when I was struck by lightning. Um, no, because it is. I just say that because it is hard to find a defining
Yeah.
moment. Other times, it's just something that you grow into. From at least for me, it was. I was an elementary school student, probably second or third grade, before I thought I wanted to be an artist. That was
Mm-hmm.
about the time, because during that time, I got a lot of good feedback from my friends and my parents, like, "Oh, you should be an artist." You know how they always say that to
Yeah,
kids,
they
to
do.
just to be nice to them. Well, I took it seriously when they said that. I'm like, "Oh, okay, I should do that." Because I was one of those students who would always draw on his assignments. If I could draw
Yeah.
something instead of writing an essay, I would do that. And I'm like, that kind of would, that made me figure out. I think from an early age, I just always wanted to do art, and because I liked the feedback I got, I liked the positive results, and I was not extremely gifted. I know more than any other kid at age
Right.
8 or 9. It's just something that I stuck with, and um, I wasn't an extremely hardworking art student up until probably my early 20s. I just because I was one of those people who was told, "Oh, you're good, you're so good," that I didn't work as hard, and I think that can be a double-edged sword. If you encourage a child too much and give them too much positive feedback, it can dull their ambitions and make them think they don't need training.
Yeah.
uh, and it wasn't until I saw other artists that I finally started working with at the theme parks who, had really awesome sketchbooks, way better than I had, and aside from their caricature art. And I thought, how do you do that? Where did you learn that? And they said, oh, this school here in San Diego. And this is where I've been going. And I'm like, okay, I need to do that too. And so, yeah, I was probably in my early, mid 20s before I started really taking my art education seriously and trying to really learn how to draw and paint. But yeah,
Right.
the design has always been there, and the skill hopefully started to catch up with the desire. You just don't know how bad you are until you start getting around other good artists that are slightly better than you or way better than you.
Yeah, that's usually an issue. So when you I believe you're, I think, older than I am, maybe. I don't know. How old are you right now?
Just recently turned 43.
Okay, yeah, you're way older than me.
Way older. Nice.
Sorry. No, I'm 33. So yeah, it's about a decade distance. So when you were becoming an artist, the digital art wasn't even starting. Like it was almost starting. It was the ILM times of, the Knoll brothers and Craig Mullins and all of those, very early adopters of Photoshop, where it was just all just starting. but far, far away from where when it became mainstream for a regular artist, when even Wacom or any other tablets were available. When I was joining um, the digital art movement, that stuff was already there, the Photoshops and Wacoms and all of that stuff. So um, the reason I ask is because unless you're exposed to internet today, when you're exposed to internet, social media, forums, any of those places, you quickly realize that there's a big world of entertainment design, that there are artists out there, even if you are just using your phone with Instagram and anything like that. You can quickly find a lot of artists out there, and you don't have to be smart almost to realize that that's a job. You can just
Mm.
clearly see that that's there. When I was joining, that wasn't so apparent. Like you couldn't just find, oh, I'm gonna go on forums and see what everyone else is doing. And I'm guessing when you were in that moment where you started to realize, when you were working at the theme park and meeting other artists, that was probably the only avenue for you to really realize, like, oh, there's the world of other people that are better. And I was just in that bubble of thinking that I'm already good because all of my friends and family were telling me that, because they don't know better, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I'm just I find this to be a pattern between a lot of artists that I talk with, a lot of friends that I talked with. My good friend from Naughty Dog, Eitan Zana, was telling me exactly the same thing when he was in high school, and he's younger. He's like younger, and he was joining the industry a little later, when it was more developed. He was still on this under this impression that he's the shit. And yeah, it is interesting for sure. And my curiosity just comes from like your own reaction and learning. So I'm guessing because of the era, you went through more of a traditional learning experiences, right? Did you go to like a college that teaches art? How was your path to actually get better from that moment when you realized, all right, I need to sort of invest my time into this a little more than I've been doing so far? How did it go down from there?
Yeah, when I was going to college in the mid 90s, I went to a UC school, a University of California school, and I just went into it right after high school, not knowing anything about my choices for art universities or art academies. I didn't really look into it. I just assumed, okay, I'll go to this college because it sounds good,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure the art program is fine. It was not a great art program for someone who's traditionally inclined. It was very avant-garde and
Right.
very conceptual, and it was just, you had to take performance art classes, and it was not me at all, and it really didn't help my art skills in the slightest. I'm sorry to say. And it's a shame they call that an art. I got an art degree, and I did not know what I wanted to do. Didn't have any discernible art skills at a professional level when I left that school.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the art history classes were good, and I mean, I guess I learned something, but I don't know what it was. It wasn't until after, when I went to the atelier, that I actually got a decent art education. So, I guess I learned what I didn't like and what I didn't want to do in art at
Right.
college. And, I found the photography classes and computer art that they had in the day were more interesting to me. I mean, I couldn't really get into those computer art classes because that wasn't part of my course requirements for what I was doing. It wasn't like
Right.
graphic design. So, but I did get a chance, in the photography classrooms to, play around with early Wacom tablets and, draw on them. And we heard rumors about digital cameras one day coming out that might be as good or even better than traditional film cameras. But back then, just wasn't happening. It wasn't, it was just a dream still. So it's kind
Yeah,
of
it's true.
far, come so far in just a decade after that, to get into the really good digital cameras. Um, but I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. What was the question again? Sorry.
Your sort of like pathway of how, from the moment you realized, I need to get better, to where you went and where you went to actual college, and it seems you did. It was USC, right?
Uh, you know,
University.
well, I don't want to, talk too bad about my my college,
It's
but
all right.
it was one of the Southern California colleges. Yeah.
Got it.
It wasn't that one though.
Okay.
Um,
No, USC is in LA. You live closer to San Diego though,
yeah,
right?
I'm in San Diego. Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
here
yeah,
most
yeah.
of my life. Yeah.
I don't think USC even has art degree. If they do, it probably sucks a lot, like
I
really
don't know.
bad. I don't think they
I
have.
couldn't say.
I the only art college that I'm aware of that still sort of holds the standard that is really high, and if you go through it, you are going to be prepared to work in the at least in entertainment and industrial design, is Art Center in Pasadena. That's
Yeah, I heard
really the
good.
only one that I know of,
Yeah,
especially in California. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
but now,
weird.
well, luckily now there are a lot of smaller atelier schools popping up. There's, of course, the Watts School here in San Diego, and then there's uh, the Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art. I think is pretty good. They have a lot of really good teachers there, but
Yeah,
it's course and teachers are like really like there's a lot of them. One thing I did like about the Watts School is that there's a small core group of teachers, and they don't try to expand and be too big. That way, the school as a whole has a very cohesive teaching philosophy because all the teachers were trained at that school.
yeah,
Very rarely does Jeff bring in someone who was not primarily trained there, and so everyone jives with each other. But that doesn't mean that everyone there draws or paints the same. It's actually quite the opposite. All the teachers there have such different focuses in their career. Like one guy does dragon fantasy paintings, other guy does horror stuff, another woman does fine art like historical costume pretty paintings, and it just goes all over the map. And a really good foundation school, a school that teaches good fundamentals, can lets you do anything in art. Basically, you can take it and go into concept design or
yeah.
video games or fine art or illustration or graphic design or animation. It just you got to have good fundamentals before you can kind of do the specialty training, I think. And that's where universities tend to fail people, young artists, is in their fundamentals. It's hard to teach. It's really, really hard to teach how to draw the figure properly, in a realistic way. And people might say, well, I don't want to draw realistically. That's boring. You just get a camera. But I've always told people who say that have that kind of argument, well, you don't want to be limited by what you don't know. You don't want to be
Yeah.
stuck in style because you don't know how to draw any other way. Like I talk to a lot of young kids and they want to draw just anime. That's what they want to do. They want to draw manga or anime style. And I'm like, okay, that's a style and that may go out of fashion one day. And where will you be if that does? And it's those people who draw in manga. They are good traditional artists with good foundation skills. They didn't just learn
Yeah.
manga. They didn't
Yeah.
anime.
Have you ever
Uh,
looked into when we're talking about manga? I'm just curious if you ever looked into how those really good artists, how they are performing, like how they were doing the animations. Have you ever looked into that you personally, just out of interest?
no, not really. Like those really niche styles don't really interest me so much as an
Got
artist.
it.
I just like fine art. I like the golden age of illustration, the Rockwells and Cornwells, and the artists of the late 19th century like Sargent, Zorn, and Sorolla. Those portrait
Yeah.
artists, figured artists are just so amazing in what they did. And I used to be kind of bored by portrait art when I was like in college, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really, as far as looking at it, I thought it was it's just a portrait. But they really to do a good portrait like Sargent did. There's so much that goes into just balancing the composition and
Yeah.
working in the middle range of values, and it's so incredibly hard. The more I learn about art, the more difficult I realize it is, and the longer I have to
Yeah.
learn to get to that level. It's the more you know, it's like the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah, that's true. The only reason I'm asking is because I actually, out of curiosity, because I enjoy anime, like good anime, not all anime, like really good anime, especially classics from the 90s and 80s, like, Akira and Ghost in the Shell. Those are probably two of my favorite.
Yeah.
Recently, Blame is a pretty good one, but it's more like in the 3D realm. It's actually on Netflix. There's bunch of others that I really enjoyed, but Akira and Ghost in the Shell were probably my favorite. Also, like anything that came out from the Ghibli studio, and I, out of curiosity, just looked into how they were making those animes back then, And the level of artistry and art knowledge that is required to create something like Acura is just insane. It's just like it's on the level of, as you said, knowing pretty much all of the foundation of art in order for you to be actually good at what you're doing. Because it seems like it's all stylized, as you say. It's more of a niche. It's a pretty big niche, especially in Japan, but and
Yeah.
it's getting bigger and bigger in in Western world. But it's still a niche, and but you can tell a good one from the bad one, and the guys and girls that were doing the good one usually were amazing artists by themselves. Otomo Katsuhiro, who was the creator of Akira, you can actually purchase his book on Amazon called Jenga, which is basically pretty much an art history of his illustrations. He was an excellent illustrator before he became a director, and he started with very realistic style, like almost photorealism of inks and pencils. Before he went into stylized work that actually allowed him the knowledge of the foundation knowledge, the knowledge of anatomy, the knowledge of facial expressions, and you know all of those expressive moments on how you should work with the facial structures in order to express certain feelings and certain emotions. He went through realistic style before he even went into that manga drawing. And Akira, when you watch it, is actually one of those animes where facial expressions are so rich you can tell how character feels just by looking at it without even hearing it. So that was kind of interesting. I know it's in connection to what you're saying, because I agree with you 100%. Having a very good foundation in terms of whether it's if you want to become an entertainment concept artist, for instance, it's you have to know color, you have to understand perspective really well, and it just the list goes on and on before you even start thinking about like, oh, I'm gonna use the photo bashing techniques, or I'm gonna grab some 3D and do some renders with that. It's just like those are just technicalities. Those are just tools that allow you to get better or faster, but not necessarily give you the foundation that you're starting with. And I believe it's the same story with caricature, right?
As far as just learning traditional
Just
drawing first.
just in general, like if you would want to become, because you're primarily, so what is your primer apart from teaching, right? Because that's what you spend a lot of time on, I assume, right? You're
Well,
also
lately, I mean, since doing the Proco course, yeah, I mean, I
Mhm.
haven't taught at the Atelier since 2012, I think. And
Okay,
a couple years after that is when Stan asked me, or about a year later, Stan asked me to join in on his
gotcha.
projects. But I mean, I'm primarily at work, I'd say, as in illustration and party entertainment. Actually,
Oh, okay,
I still do live caricatures at events, but lately I do them digitally on a Wacom tablet, and where I project it on a big screen, and that's kind of a big seller lately. And it's actually a pretty good income. It's hard to turn down. It's you spend a few hours at an event, getting a good paycheck, and then you can have the rest of the week to like work at home and do other
that's cool.
projects.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I could say it's a balance between live entertainment, art caricature, and commissioned work from people, and then illustrations for publication, and whether it's just
Right.
a small magazine job or a book cover or something like that.
Yeah, I might be sounding completely ignorant when I'm talking about those things, because it's just such an alien world for me. It's like I primarily sit in video games and film. Those are the industry that I spend the most of my professional career in. So learning other industries is just always like, what is this whole thing all about? So it's kind of interesting. And that's if I ask you like, what is this caricature thingy that you're doing? I hope you're not taking it as an offense, because I just literally don't know.
Well, I do like to try to clear up conceptions about what caricature is whenever I can.
Sure.
I belong to a group, actually, the International Society of Caricature Artists. Sort of an unspoken goal of the group is to expand awareness for what caricature is.
Right.
And I actually have an even broader definition of caricature. I think all art is technically a form of caricature.
Gotcha.
And it's really obvious when it comes into concept design, video game design, when you're doing characters. Like, say you have to do a demon character.
Yeah.
That's essentially still a human character, but with caricaturized traits. You're changing consciously something about an average person to make them more into something scary, or you're caricaturing a woman's body to make her more voluptuous and feminine, and that's a caricature where you're heightening her femininity and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Something like the Incredible Hulk, you're heightening the masculinity. The Incredible Hulk is a caricature of a bodybuilder, essentially.
Yeah.
And so caricature is everywhere. To me, caricature is just an intentional change you make to a subject, and whether it's to flatter your portrait subject by lengthening their neck a little bit to make them look thinner, that's a form of caricature. I happen to do mostly caricature where the goal is to make someone laugh, to be sort of humorous proportions, but still make it extremely, the likeness is sort of enhanced. And that's what most people think of as caricature, is where the likeness becomes even more obvious, so that the caricature drawing can look more like the person than they look like themselves.
Right.
Because the basic concept of what a caricature is, like when you're drawing it, the goal is to make those traits which are different from the average more obvious to the viewer. So if someone has eyes that are closer together than the average, in the caricature they get really close together. If their jaw is bigger and larger than the average, even if it's only a millimeter or two, if you can pick up on that difference, make the chin even larger. So you're constantly switching around and changing and stretching the relationships of the proportions in a way that makes a person look different from that average. And by the average, I mean that diagram you usually see in most art instruction manuals, like in the Loomis books on the head proportions, where there's 1/3 division between the features and the eyes, or one eye width apart. So I go off that as my basis of comparison when I'm looking at whoever it is I'm caricaturing. Oh wait, I just taught everybody how to caricature there. Nobody needs to see my course now. Oh, well. No, that's the founding principle, and it's really easy to understand. It's just kind of hard to implement, and there's a lot of exercises you can do and procedures to improve your skills at caricaturing for humorous purposes. But I think caricature is a great sort of experience for any artist to have, based on just the fact that it allows you to control what you're drawing more consciously.
Right.
You don't want your work to be artificially or unintentionally distorted, where an eye is up higher for no reason other than you're sloppy. You want to be conscious of the procedure when you're drawing it. Do those crosshairs when you draw the alignment lines in. That's part of my caricaturing process that I teach, actually, is how to get something that's extremely exaggerated but still looks like it could exist in 3 dimensions. So if you're looking up this way or to the left or right or down, the features will be aligned properly in space, but on a really extremely exaggerated head.
Right.
And I think that could be helpful for anyone who's doing kind of illustration or humorous art or concept or video game design and anything like that. Animation too. And all animated characters are essentially caricatures of real people as well.
I was about to mention, like, one of my friends that when I was learning to become an artist, and I'm basically self-taught. Like, I didn't go to any art school. I personally just didn't have money and didn't know what to do. That was just one of the reasons. Coming from the Eastern Europe, and growing up there and trying to figure everything out. But one of my friends, he was actually one of the guys who was working with Tomek Bagiński, the guy who actually inspired me to become a digital artist. One of my friends was his friend, and he actually worked with him on that project that was so inspiring to me. And he was more of like a animation. He does very sort of caricature-esque characters, very sort of distorted, but more towards the animation style rather than like regular sort of caricature look. And one of the things I remember he told me was because I was like super inspired, like doing animation stuff and drawing out of proportions characters and weird monsters, creatures, and all of that stuff. I had like a period of time where I was trying to learn that, and he was sort of like mentoring me during that time, I remember. And one of the things he said, learn proportions first. Like, learn how to draw the actual character and learn how anatomy works, because if you don't do that, then you're just intentionally making proportions wrong without even knowing you're doing that. You're not focusing on expanding specific features of the character that are responsible for expression or exaggeration of expression. You're doing it because you just don't know better. So I remember that stick to me. And he did mention Andrew Loomis, matter of fact. So there you go. Andrew Loomis did a pretty amazing job with his books. I highly recommend them, as you do. I'm pretty sure as well. So that's interesting. It's if the interesting part here for me is that it seems to me that you are uh, your work and the industry you're in is, although it's different to, let's say, video games and film, there's so many similarities that can be just crossing over. They're crossing over constantly, and that's what I find intriguing. It's almost like talking with you and listening to what you're saying. It's almost like confirming uh, my assumption here. So,
Yeah.
so
And
yeah.
actually, I did a bit of film work myself. A few years ago, I did a bunch of character designs for a film project where they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do animated film using the actors who would be providing the voices. I'd be doing caricatures of them in their roles. I can't really say who. It's still in development, I guess,
Right.
technically. But they came to me because they liked, I guess, how I did sort of realistic looking, three-dimensional looking caricatures that could be extrapolated by a 3D renderer. So I worked with their animators and designers to create, some of the stars for this movie project, and in caricature form. And we tweaked, the exact level of exaggeration a lot. So, and that was a fun learning process for me, actually being involved in an actual film, a visual development project for a while, just on a freelance basis. Of course, I wasn't really in the
Yeah.
studio thing, but it got me. Well, actually, no, it didn't get me an IMDb credit, but if it ever gets published, I guess it would. Well, I did a few movie posters too, so I'm on IMDb for that. But the movies,
That's
you don't
cool.
want.
What
They're
what
kind of
posters did you work on?
they're really like low budget, raunchy comedies. Like one's called Skid Marks, I think, if that says anything, and the other one's it's like a Kentucky Fried movie type movie where it's a bunch of like skits that are sort of
Gotcha.
gross out comedy. I can't remember the name of that one right now. Uh, but every
I'll
when you
I'll
want to
I'll
get,
find you. I'll find you on IMDb and check it out myself. I'm just curious because it's just like, you know, just curious. Really just that.
yeah.
I've realized honestly, the more I've been in the film industry, the more I realize that credits, although they matter for having maybe more opportunities to work in better films, especially with the studios, it's usually the fact that the bigger the films you work on, usually the more connections you get and therefore more work you're getting. But
Hmm.
just outside of that, just disregarding that part, and I understand it's pretty important to have connections, and I've been there, done that, and I understand connections are important. However, um, the more I've been working on films, the more I realize it really doesn't matter how big the film is, because usually the bigger the film and the bigger of success of the film is, it's usually ended up being something that I hated working on, or was not enjoying working on as much as I would enjoy working on something maybe smaller or more satisfying that ended up being just a crappy movie, for instance, right? So it's kind of weird. It's like you're working on the film and you're having a lot of fun. There's a group of people that you're interacting with, and it's all going really well. And the movie comes out, and it's like you're scratching your head. How the fuck did that happen? How did that happen? What went wrong? But yeah, it's intriguing. Um, yeah, it's foundation is because I personally teach as well, and I've started actually teaching about maybe 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago the first time I actually had teaching experience. And the more I've been having interactions with students, the more I've realized that foundation is important, and the more I want to teach something that is foundation related, the more I realize like, there's a lot of things I just don't know yet, and maybe I should investigate or spend more time into diving deeper into that. And it's an interesting experience. I wonder what your experiences with teaching are. Right now, you're doing more of a tutorials, or do you have like any kinds of mentorship programs or anything that allows students to have like personal interactions with you, or it's more of a video format?
It's primarily video tutorial lessons that are they're very casual and conversational, although every line, every word is planned out and scripted ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I edit them down so that they're very concise and they're not any more time than what needs to be taken. Because I hate watching, really long videos that, for an hour or two, just trying to get the nuggets of information, or the artist rambles on because they're just talking off the cuff. It's just harder to sit through that sort of thing. So most of our tutorials are like 5 to 10 minutes for the main lessons, and we could flash the video, the examples, and time lapses of the demos. And then there's a lot more. There's sometimes longer versions of those videos, slightly longer versions in the premium version of the course, and also many more additional demos where we do time
Mm-hmm.
lapse and narrate everything. And the narrations are all scripted as well. Like I'll watch my own time lapse instruction over and over again, stop it, write some stuff, stop it again, play it some more, write some more, and then I'll record that narration and they incorporate that at the Proco Studios into the lesson or into the demo. So almost every single thing is narrated, and it's only as long as it needs to be and no longer. I don't want to waste people's time with the lessons.
Yeah.
So it's primarily that. But after every main lesson, there is a student critique video. So where I'll take like 10 or 12 student works where they submit them on the Facebook caricature group, and which is set up just for the people viewing the Proco videos. I mean, it's public; anyone can join it, even if they're not members of the premium course.
Got
And
it.
I'll pick student submissions, and I'll do a session down at the Proco Studios in front of their desk and just talk through problems that people are having, draw right on top of their works, and address issues that I see in the drawings. And that's a lot like what I did at the Watts Atelier, where you come up over someone's shoulder and say, oh, okay, you know what? Your eye's a little low here. You really need to just lay in your construction lines.
Mm-hmm.
You give them very detailed, personalized critiques on a one-on-one basis. And of course, we can't do that with hundreds and hundreds of students with the format we have. So we pick some selective students, we try to make different students every time. And
Right.
people who watch the critiques at home, even if their work isn't being critiqued personally, they'll probably still find lessons in the other people's works. Oh yeah, I'm having that problem too, they'll think to themselves. I have
Mm.
a problem with distorting the legs on the drawings, and I see now that's how you fix it. So they're relatable, and I think that's a really important part of the teaching process and learning. The watching the videos is very passive unless you're, actively doing the homework assignments that I give at the end of each lesson.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do the homework, and then they'd feel probably pretty cheated if they didn't get some kind of feedback. So, yeah, we do
Sure.
definitely make a point of doing the feedback. And every now and then we do a contest where one person might win, a one-on-one Skype session with me where I'll spend a while talking to them at length about their work and what they could do to improve. We did that once. We'll probably do it again, giving away a one-on-one session.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds really cool. And maybe after we finish this podcast, you can just send me the links. I'll incorporate them in the description of the video, so anyone who's listening to it, they can just go down and check out the links to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe get more people interested with it too. So,
For the people
um,
watching live, it's proco.com/caricature for my
oh,
course.
perfect. There you go.
And Stan
Well,
has his courses on there. Stan teaches the more traditional,
mhm.
head drawing, figure drawing, and right now he's in the middle of this extremely extensive anatomy course where he's going over every portion of the body step by step, and it's taken a while, but he's doing it very, very thoroughly. So that's an
Yeah,
amazing course. And anyone that wants to do caricature really well, I do suggest that they study traditionally how to construct the head. At least,
yeah.
if not detailed anatomy, at least get the procedure down for learning how to construct a head. I think
Yeah,
it's very important.
I was about to ask you when you were working with students in the atelier and when you were working with some of those submissions from the Facebook group, what is the most common mistake you see when it comes to the submissions to the work that you're seeing and reviewing?
Not seeing how they're at their desks drawing, I can only guess that they're being sort of maybe rushing through things and being a little sloppy
Mm-hmm.
in their construction, and maybe not following the step-by-step procedures I outline and how to construct the head from, and the caricatures have this very methodical process that I've developed in my own workflow to help me improve. and I incorporated those into the fundamentals of this course, where it's, you start with a thumbnail sketch, and you then you do a rough sketch to flesh it out a little more. Then you do sort of the Riley abstraction. Actually, I teach the Riley abstraction as part of my caricature course as a, it's a portrait drawing technique, but it works
Hmm.
really well for caricature. And then there's like a final drawing after that. So I'll tell them usually go back to the construction phase, because basically I think the biggest problem is most people's structure is really bad, where someone's eye is up here and the other eye is down there, and it looks like a melty face. And the same thing with the body. We have a course, we have a lesson on caricaturing the figure as well, and people seem to have a lot of problem with that. And because there are a lot of variables to consider when drawing, especially the figure. There's the gesture and movement of the pose, and then there's the construction of the anatomy, and then there's the folds and the clothing on top of that. And does it flow nicely into the head? Some people draw these gigantic, huge heads with tiny stick bodies, and I know that's people tend to do that because that's what they see in caricature, big heads and little bodies. But I teach in this course more what you could use in caricature illustration. Like if you get a cover of a magazine and they want a politician on it, you can't do a head that's 10 times the size of the body. It doesn't work out. It doesn't,
Yeah.
it's you got to keep slightly closer to human proportions when you're doing high-end illustration. I think they can be definitely oversized because that's funny, but not too big. So yeah, I guess construction, and people tend to really have a hard time with likeness when they start exaggerating. Either they try to exaggerate too much and they miss the likeness entirely, or they get a decent likeness, but then there's no exaggeration and it's not very funny at all because they're a little bit scared of losing the
Right.
likeness. And that's what it's like in the beginning. It's not easy to do caricature, to do it well, because you've got to worry about all these variables. That's why in my courses, in my lesson, I break down the variables into different steps. So for this one, just focus on the exaggeration. For this step, just focus on the construction. For this one, just focus on the rendering now that you've got the construction laid in. And I think breaking it down into baby steps makes it a little more accessible to people. It's just I like methodical approaches, and I like formulas, at
Right.
least in the beginning. Formulaic ways of building up, from a simple to something more complex, I think is very, very helpful. And then later on, when you get more advanced, you can ditch the formulas and definitely be more experimental, because the formulas are part of the fundamental training, and that's what it all goes back to, is learning good fundamentals. If you're a musician, you have to. I mean, I'm not a musician. I don't know what you have to do to be a good musician, but I assume you have to practice your scales on the
Yeah, you
piano
have
and
to practice
memorize
for sure.
and learn how to read your music. And I don't know how to read music, but that's part of your fundamentals. Before you can be a good jazz player, you have to learn traditionally, I think, first. Maybe that's not true. I shouldn't say that. Yeah, not a jazz musician.
I remember from music lessons, when you're reading notes, usually you have like the naming convention for each of the note, and then the more advanced you get, it's like the names and some of the symbols disappear. And you only get the notes themselves. And then you
Hmm.
get like extra symbols that mean something, like maybe some transitions and whatnot, that are just like black magic when you're starting. I guess
Yeah.
it could be you could compare it to what we do in art, where when you're starting with foundation, it just becomes your bread and butter, and it's just it's almost like walking and thinking, right? It just becomes like a mechanical process for you, where you're gonna do it pretty much anytime you're starting and you're painting. That's gonna be a process you're going through because it's just engraved in you after countless of times of doing it over and over and over and over again with the right step by step process. So I guess that's what you're talking about, just sort of like making those synapse connections in your brain that this has to happen in order to that to happen, so that later on you can actually skip it because sort of like those steps already by memory, and you can just like visualize the result of those few extra steps in advance. So I think that makes a lot of sense. It does definitely make a lot of sense in concept art, where you know when you're starting and you're learning, you would start with, maybe laying out perspective lines. And if you're working with 3D, starting with like boxes and sort of general layout, and then going into detail step by step, almost like you would do with the canvas, where you start with major brush strokes and then you go into detail slowly but surely. Um, but then eventually you can skip that step entirely, and because you can already visualize that. So I can definitely see that as a pathway. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
And
Um,
I had a teacher and mentor once I took some private lessons with, and he pointed out a lot of the similarities between formal art education or just art in general and music. There's a lot of overlap in the terms and the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like we use the term composition to describe a piece of music as well as a composition of a painting's the way you
Yeah.
arrange things in space. There's notes of color you use when you're dabbing colors on the canvas. There's there's rhythms in the abstraction lines. We usually call them rhythms because they sort of measure out the major landmarks along a path. The way rhythm and music sort of sets the beat of the music. There's harmony with the colors, just like there's
Yeah.
harmony between the different voices and the notes. So there's it's kind of poetic when you think about it, how much art has in common with music on that abstract.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
does. When you look at the when you look at principles of the design, pretty much any single principle of the design could be implemented in both areas. You know, as you say, rhythm, balance, notes, all of those things are parallel almost. So that's true. That's true. I've been always curious because you know, as you teach and you see those mistakes that happen. One of the questions that popped up to my head was, where do you start with the character? Like, let's assume you understand the basic anatomy. You sort of understand the construction. You know how to construct faces, um, and the more obviously you practice, the more you master it. But how do you find those features of likeness that you want to exaggerate in order to make the likeness even more of that specific character, right?
hmm
Where do you find those features? What do you focus on when you're searching for them?
Well, I think you mentioned before about how you start with the big ideas first, the big brushstrokes first, and work your way down to the details. And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of approach caricature the same way, in that I look for the biggest shapes first and how those shapes differ from the average. So essentially, it's the head shape is what I look for primarily when doing a caricature in the beginning. I say, how does my subject's head differ from the average? How does Keira Knightley's head differ from Jay Leno's? Well, they're kind of like exact opposites. Her head is, wider at the top and narrower at the jaw.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm remembering her right. And then Jay Leno's like really wide at the jaw. So their head shapes are going to be very, very different in caricature. And
Yeah.
once you have head shape established, it actually, and it's a really good head shape. And if you can see a likeness in just the head shape without even drawing the features, you're on your way. And that's a good head shape. And then you just got to kind of plug them in the right spots. And that takes some experimentation. Even I still do lots of different thumbnail sketches, searching for the right combination of feature alignment. The head shapes also I tend to play with in the thumbnail sketches. So, uh, I mean, it's yeah. I mean, that's generally the way I approach every caricature. Is I start with a loose, quick thumbnail of the biggest shapes first, and then
Mm-hmm.
I don't really worry about the details until I get to the later stages. Even like when I get into the rough sketch, in the next stage, I'm just basically trying to then refine the likeness. And if the likeness isn't there, I'll try to compare it up against the photo and figure out where I went off. And it might be in the tilt, the angle of the eyes is off, or it might be the length of the philtrum maybe needs to change to increase the likeness. And so
Right.
I'll do some tracing. So there's some searching as you're drawing. It's a very fluid process, and the development of the likeness continues at every step. The next step after my rough sketches, I do an abstraction overlay on top of it, where I'm tracing rhythm lines over the shapes of the rough sketch, and I'll make alterations at that stage, and then I'll trace my final drawing over the abstraction and still make changes if I think I can improve the likeness or heighten the exaggeration in some way. So the more time, it's kind of like iterations on a drawing, like in visual development for a film project or a character. The more times you draw it, you change it slightly each time, hopefully with better results. Of course, you're just in your studio alone doing caricatures, whereas in a film, you tend to have to get, I guess, probably feedback from the art director and other people. And
Right.
I sometimes have to work with art directors too, but they're not usually concerned with the likeness or the exaggeration. They leave that up to me, and if they can recognize who it is, that's good enough for them. They're not too picky. They just want to make sure that the story is being told, whether it's a political statement being made or the editorializing of it,
Right.
is clear. And so art directors, in that sense, are kind of more easygoing when it comes to caricature. As long as you know your stuff, and as long as you kind of make it look like the person, they don't really care about the level of of exaggeration.
Got it.
Um,
Got it. Makes
yeah.
sense. Because
Uh,
I was always under impression that it start. I guess it's different by artist. Because it seems that you're starting with already exaggerated shapes rather than starting with the form of something that's already existing, and then going from there. Like you're not distorting. Let's say I've seen some of the caricature art that it's been brilliant, but it starts from where the photo is, and then it comes into those exaggerations, like liquefying in the directions of exaggerating forms and all of that stuff, where it sort of like the base is already there, but you're just like trying to experiment what makes more sense in terms of how you're going to characterize that existing base. It seems to me you're working in more of a traditional way where the sketch itself is the starting form, and yeah, it makes it's more difficult, I would say, and I guess the more rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, since I got, I mean, I did caricatures before I started taking good portrait classes at the atelier.
Hmm.
But when I did start taking those classes, it really affected my work in that I had a better procedure and process for developing it, for developing the caricatures, and that is how I kind of teach it. But there's so many different ways to do caricatures and so many styles that you don't need to do my process the way I do it to do good caricatures. Some people do very simple cartoony animation style caricatures.
Yeah,
Some people do caricatures that are so insanely distorted and stretched you almost have to think and look at and decipher it like a puzzle. But then once you see it, you're like, oh my god, that's Paris Hilton. I can see it now, even though it's like there's an eye up here, there's an eye down there, and there's a lips over, and it's almost abstract, like a Picasso caricature.
yeah,
And I mean,
I've
they can
seen
be
those
just
too.
beautiful when they're well done. They're just amazing to look at, and that's not way out of my wheelhouse. I'm definitely more traditional in how I approach it, but that kind of makes it difficult too when you're in teaching people and critiquing their work, because if they have a style that's drastically different, if they want to do a more cartoony, simplistic style, I have to sort of shift my own mode of teaching to try to figure out what they were trying to achieve.
Hmm.
How well did they achieve their goal of doing a simple animation style caricature or a comic style caricature? And I don't try to fit them all into my mold and make them draw just like me, because that would be kind of boring. So that is one of the difficult parts about teaching, is when they get a little more advanced, they tend to want to branch out and do different styles, and you got to
Yeah,
figure out how best they can do that style and figure out ways that they can improve it. Like, how can they apply the Riley abstraction, for instance, to improve this abstract, a character that is already abstracted.
yeah.
um, but that's I guess the joy of teaching too, is it's always sort of different and always surprising.
It is. I mean, I know it from experience of learning and being a student myself, where I constantly want to learn something. It's even now when I've done so many things already, and you might assume like, oh, you're on the good path of your career. Why are you spending time learning new things? And I do. Just like to go with times. But the things that I learn is like, when you learn 3D, and the first thing you're gonna do is go find tutorials and good material on how to work with the UI and what the tools are and how to master the tool. And usually it starts like modeling some trash cans and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I usually go just like start with the trash can, but then it turns into like a spaceship or something, And yeah, I can totally tell that sort of judging a student by their own approach it might be a difficult thing, because you have your own style of working, and you have your own path of how you go, um, how you go by things, and how you develop the whole process from start to finish. But I would guess I mean, from what I understand from what you've been saying so far, I guess the most common denominator for pretty much any critique would be the foundation at this point, having a solid foundation and starting with that.
Yeah, that is key. I mean, because there's so many possibilities and so many styles and genres of art, that sometimes the only thing you can critique is if they have good fundamental skills and
Yeah.
choices that they've made in the construction of whatever it is they're doing. And then on top of the style and the personal expression of it is just the dressing. It's just the curtains, on the house. The house has to have that strong foundation in order to stand upright.
Yeah, it is, even for a lot of professionals, it is a hard pill to swallow, to know like, the foundation has to be there and has to be right. I find by working with students that there's quite a big subset of people that just want to find that one, that that recipe. Like if you follow those steps, you're done. Like you know everything. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to practice. Just follow those steps, and you're golden. You know, like this is the shortcut to a success. You know, that kind of deal. And there are some paths where you can create something really visually stunning, but that's going only to be this one thing. And the moment you get asked like, can you change some of the aspects of that thing, that's when it becomes problematic. And I would assume it would be same with caricature, where if you would have a student that say draws something that looks beautiful, but then you ask him, hey, can you change the angle of the character or the angle of the face by 45 degrees in a different direction, and maybe the expression from being sad to smiling. For someone who found that shortcut for this one specific illustration, that's becoming an impossible task. um, do you find that often with students? Do you find them like trying to find this one sort of click solution, or I don't know?
No, in my experiences at the atelier when I taught people in person, and then so far in this online course, I haven't seen people, sticking to. I guess maybe there are a couple that stick to these tendencies, these maybe comfort zones that they don't want to get out of, as
Right.
far as angles they typically do. It's thankfully kind of rare. I mean, a lot of the students will try profiles and front views and interesting expressions, and they have a hard time with them, but at least they're trying, and that's way
Mm-hmm.
better. Trying and failing is way better than being able to just doing that same 3/4 view every single time you draw somebody and doing that well, because that's gonna be your weakness, is being able to adapt and do something a little different from that, and that shows that there's a lack of fundamental skills there. It means they just memorized how to do something really well in a certain way, and they're going to stick with that. But yeah, like I said, that's pretty rare. I don't see a lot of people that have that tendency,
Mm. Okay.
thankfully. Yeah,
I think it's definitely going to be more rare in an atelier environment, where I guess someone who goes to atelier, you can tell that they're more committed versus online. It is.
yeah,
I found it more difficult online. Actually, when I was teaching in because there are a couple of like smaller schools, not necessarily ateliers. There are more like digital art schools
hmm,
in LA. The first that I started teaching in was Red Engine, that was run by my friend Steve Jung, who now is actually one of the art directors for the Universal Studios. And I remember, yeah, it was kind of weird to find. There was definitely a subset of students that were very committed to learning, but there was also, I don't know, it was a weird mix of very dedicated students and those who are just sort of like, this is cool, I'm gonna try it out, but I don't have energy or motivation to follow through and actually go really deep into learning and becoming an artist. Let's put it this way. So it was quite of an interesting experience. I think it's more apparent in online teaching than in on location, because on location also means it's more expensive very often, and you have to go there on a regular basis, and that's a commitment on its own. So, but yeah, that was one of the reasons I'm asking. And also, I'm curious, like, what would your reaction be? Like, let's say you have a student that is very stubborn, and like this is sort of like going back to their antics of sticking to that comfort zone. Like, this is the style I work in, and I don't really want to change it because it works for me. And you said the key words that I really like, which is try and fail. How would you break that sort of? Because I know a lot of students that I work with are afraid to fail. There's a lot of people that are afraid to post images that they don't like the things that went wrong and something just didn't. Yeah.
I mean, I'm one of them.
I'm one of them too. Honestly, actually, yeah, I do a lot of work that I never post because it's just so shitty.
Yeah, no one. I mean, no one's going to benefit from seeing my really, really bad sketches.
Right.
Yeah.
But how
But
would
I know what
you
you're talking about. There are people that. Yeah, well, go ahead with your question. Yeah.
yeah, how would you approach a person like that when you would want to encourage someone, hey, go there and fail. Like, go and fail actually millions of times until you succeed. How would you motivate a person like that?
Probably just by showing them the results by doing it myself. If hopefully I can do it correctly too. Like as an example, a lot of people, myself included, have sometimes difficulty drawing foreshortened figures or foreshortened limbs, like something's coming at the camera at their viewer, and to make it look correct in three-dimensional space. Sometimes the models in our atelier school would, lie down on the ground and face us, just like, I don't want to draw that angle. That's a terrible angle to draw. But you know what? That's the angle you need to draw if you think it's a hard angle. And if someone doesn't want to do it, or they just give up after doing it because they think they did a bad sketch, just sit down and say, well, you just have to do a lot of repetition of foreshortened limbs and foreshortened figures until you get better at it, because there is a way to do it. You
Yeah.
still have to just apply your fundamental skills to it. Don't let it freak you out. Don't let you, because sometimes you just get in your own way. You get in your own head thinking that, oh, wait, this is a really difficult head angle. Someone looking up their nose like this with their eyes, next to their nose. How am I going to draw that? Well, just do the good fundamentals that we taught you, and it shouldn't matter what angle the head is at. You should still pull it off if you're doing it. If you have good, strong fundamentals. It all
Yeah.
comes back to fundamentals in every time. And if someone doesn't do it, it just shows that they're kind of not committed to learning, being a better artist. And maybe hearing that advice might be shaming them into practicing more. I
Shaming
think,
into practicing. That's cool. I should try
yeah, I
that
mean,
more often.
I don't know if shame's the right word, but inspiring through, criticism.
Right.
um, I think that's one of the main pitfalls of online learning, following digital academies online and classes like my own, is not sitting down and doing the work long enough. When you're in
Yeah.
the atelier, you're coming every week for a 3-hour class and you're drawing the entire time. If you're taking a couple classes a day, you're drawing 6 hours a day. If you're sitting at home, you're not as motivated to draw 6 hours a day because there's no one watching over you. You're not paying for that time. If you're paying for a time in an atelier and it works out to be like $50 a class for whatever the tuition is, like you're going to want to spend that time learning and drawing and making the best of it, making the most of it,
Yeah.
because you're paying for that. When online classes are relatively cheap, there's an attitude of, well, okay, I'll do a couple sketches and post those online, and then maybe I'll do the assignment next week. I'll do a couple more sketches. You got to do. I mean, I don't know what the magic number is. It's probably different for everybody, but you got to do
Yeah.
hours a day of practice of the assignments you're given, because it's just like going to the gym. You can't, if you go to the gym and watch your trainer show you how to use the machines and lift those weights, you're not going to get strong just by watching those demonstrations.
I
You're going to
wish
get
it
strong
worked
by
that way.
you got to do the repetitions yourself, and the repetition is boring.
Yeah.
Learning to draw is really boring sometimes, and it's frustrating because you're not going to get good results at first. And then when you will get good results, this is the phenomenon I talk about sometimes with students, is the plateau, where maybe for a year or so you're making good, steady progress. You're starting to like your drawings. You like your drawings even more and more each day. Then you get to a point where your drawings just suck all of a sudden and you don't like them. And you think, I can't draw anymore. What am I even doing here? I'm a fraud. And what it is you've hit the plateau where your eye and brain have actually made a really good leap forward in ability and being able to see when things are off.
Yeah.
But your hand hasn't caught up with your eye yet. And so your drawings they'll look bad to you, but then you'll start climbing up the next mountain to the next plateau where you're going to actually see better progress until your eye makes that next leap forward. And then by the time you're going to reach the mountaintop eventually, you just have to go through a few plateaus where you think you suck for a while. But that's a good sign. If you're going through a period where you think you suck, that means your critical thinking abilities have actually made a good leap forward, and you're actually way ahead of the game when you're at that point.
That's a
If
very
you think your
interesting
drawings are
point.
awesome all the time, that means you're actually probably a really bad artist.
Yeah, you're like in your own bubble thinking like, "Oh, everything is all right." And then someone comes in like, "Oh, nope." It's not. It's a very interesting point what you said. It's like when you plateau, that means your brain caught up to the mistakes you make and you start to see them, but your hand didn't yet, just yet. Very, very, very smart way of looking at it, because I always, just to be clear, every artist goes through the plateau. Every artist has their moments where they think, and I guess most of the time we actually think that our work sucks. Like even today, when I look at the work that I do, I sometimes, torture myself and go on the art station and checked like what is the new work that is out there. What are the kids these days doing? You know, those 18, 19-year-old kids doing today. And I look at the work. It's like I'll be out of work in a couple of years based on what I see. And it's just like it almost seems depressing, but at the other on the other hand, it's also motivating for more progress. And you know, you're gonna have those moments when you're an artist and you think your work sucks or it's not there or you plateaued, you're not moving forward, there's nothing going on. It's usually it's a very refreshing way of seeing things, as you said, because I never thought about it this way. I always thought like, yeah, you kind of have to power through or take a break, small break, like focus your mind on something different, um, or try something completely out of your realm of the possibilities of what you're doing so far, and maybe that will spark like the engine again and make you more sort of progress. And I think I've been coasting through the work that I do that way, where I would do something, plateau, and then well, let me try something else and see if I learn something from there that I can incorporate to my work and come back with like better skills or you know new subset of tools that I can use to better the work. So very interesting way of looking. I've never looked at it this way, honestly, and this is very interesting thing. It's also come. I don't know what you don't you think that in relation to what you said that you sometimes just have to suffer through boredom and just like oh it sucks but I have to power through it in order to actually take any kind of happiness out of it anyways.
Yeah, you know, all the failures will make those few victories even more sweet.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, the some of the most helpful classes I ever took were the ones that were just I just hated going to, like figure quick sketch, where you're doing 2, 3, 5 minute poses for 3 hours straight, and it's just so many drawings you're filling up in your sketchbook, and none of them look good except you start to notice by the end of the semester they are starting to look better because you're watching what the teacher does,
Yeah.
and the more you get better at it, you see you're drawing the gesture more fluidly and more accurately, and that's the only the kind of thing that you get through doing good repetition. Like in the gym, you just your muscles will get stronger the more that you do it, and it's just quantity, quantity with good instruction with someone
Yeah.
looking over your shoulder, hopefully telling you where you're going wrong, because there is such thing as practicing badly too, where you're just reinforcing bad habits. So hopefully a
Yeah.
good teacher will show you where you have bad habits, but
Yeah, if you go
yeah,
to the gym and do it with the wrong form, you're just gonna get injured. That's
yeah.
about it. That's about it. Yeah, that's true. I think I had this moment of realization that something that looks impossible is achievable if you do it step by step. When I started running for the first time, and I started running because I was heavily overweight.
Mm.
That was one of the reasons where my back just gave up. I went to the doctor. The doctor just said, "Right out, you're fat." You're fat. You have to deal with that. So I started running, and in 3 months, or I think it was 3 or 4 months, from 30 second of run that I could do at most, and then we'd be totally exhausted and had to walk. You know, you do it in the intervals when you want to become a runner. You do intervals basically, and you just like increase the amount of run versus walk, just steadily week by week, and 4 months later you can like in 4 months you can from a position of being a couch potato you're gonna run 5 miles. You can if you dedicate and do it every day for at least 20 minutes a day, and you just like power through those moments of those obstacles where I don't want to run anymore, but it's just like half a mile more, like let's couple of more minutes, and you reach that goal like let's try 2 more minutes, so like breaking those barriers of your mental blocks where you feel like your body is giving up, but you still have that energy. You feel it if you just power through it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, 4 months you're a runner. Like you're literally a runner, and it is such a great parallel to art itself. Like when you want to become an artist and you look at your biggest inspirations, it seems impossible to get there. Like I will never be a painter like that guy. Probably not, but you might be someone who's equally good, if not better, if depending on how much you dedicate into it. Um, but granted, it's gonna be a long ass journey. It's gonna be a
Yeah.
journey without stopping, never ending journey almost at this point. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a very it's a topic that you could go on and on and on and on, and usually the answer is gonna be always the same: practice, 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 practice.
It's not an exciting answer. It's just what it is. It's what everyone has to do to get good. There's no such
Yeah.
thing as, I get really angry when people tell me, well, I mean, I know they mean it as a compliment, and I'm not saying it happens all the time, but they say you're so talented, you just have such natural talent. And it's just, I don't want to go into the explanation, but talent is a myth. There may be some people who might be maybe easier, they can pick things up easier and
Mm-hmm.
maybe are more adept at certain skills. Like maybe someone is more genetically predisposed to, say, play football
Exactly.
or golf, but they're not going to be good at football or golf unless they practice their fundamentals over and over again and
Yeah.
train day to day. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of an insult when they say you're talented and they refuse to hear any other answer. I'm like, well, actually, it's kind of like learning an instrument. I wouldn't be good at drawing if I didn't practice all the time. Like, no, it's just an inborn gift. I'm like, okay, screw you. No, I don't say that,
I
but
think it's
because they do mean it as a compliment. But it's so insulting to all the practice I've done and all the hard work I've done to get to
yeah.
wherever it is I'm at. And I just, I try to debunk the myth of talent whenever I see it pop up.
You
I
know
don't
what
like
it
that word at
is?
all.
You know what I believe it is? It's the myth of overnight success. It's what you see on TV where you switch on and Facebook is such a big company, billions of dollars. They're killing it, or Google is making billions. Well, it started somewhere, and it was usually years and years of grueling work that just seemed like it's going nowhere. Same with Beatles. Like Beatles, before they became super successful, would play in pubs and bars for like many
Yeah.
years, every night, night by night by night. They would just go to bars and play music, and it sucked. No one was interested until they got so good by just the sheer amount of practice that they did that just clicked, you know. And it's the same with art. You have to have enough practice. I used to believe for a while, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour sort of like rule,
Hmm.
in in quote rule.
Yeah.
Um, but the more experience I have, I almost feel like it's somewhere in between. So it's not really a talent, but it's not really only practice. It's a combination of nurture, how you grew up, what kind of elements of the environment that you grew up with, how they influence your mindset, and how this whole cocktail of your genetics, your genetic predispositions. Maybe your brain is firing faster when you're drawing because, like, maybe you're genetically big and strong and you become an NFL player or whatever. Um, there's usually good predispositions for you to be better, but you will never be in that place if you don't practice enough, obviously. So it's like a mix of having a good amount of practice and dedication and things and inspirations that are around you and sort of like shape and form your life. And I think the more there's actually science that is coming out that you can grow new brain cells, that you can remodel your behaviors based on repetition, and it just comes down to art as well. Like if you can remodel things based on repetition and the way you perform based on repetition, which you can obviously, then perhaps if you're not making a progress in art itself, there might be some elements of your life that are stopping you from dedicating yourself into a positive practice or practice that makes much more sense. You can have a bad practice where you're doing something you believe you're practicing, but it's not necessarily going in the right direction. Like going to the gym and doing something over and over again, but with the wrong form, you're just gonna develop more issues than benefits, right? So yeah, it's definitely there, and it is insulting when you hear like, oh, you're so talented. Yeah, yeah, I cannot be this or that because you have talent and I don't. Um, it's just yeah, it's very hard to motivate people and just to find that moment where you're trying to explain something but they don't trust into what you're saying just because of sort of like this myth of a talent or something like that. So yeah, definitely. Dude, I we've been talking for an hour now, almost, and yeah, it's time is flying. There's few questions that people ask along the way. If you want to jump to that and then wrap it up afterwards, or if you have any topics you still want to talk about, we can continue. It's really up to you.
No, I guess not. By the way, can you see my screen where I'm showing some of the images? I'm not sure if it's sharing properly. Uh,
I can see the Lord of the Rings stuff.
okay. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just in case people
No,
want to
yeah,
see some.
I've
Okay.
seen you switching some of the images. So those are really cool, by the way. Some of them
Yeah,
are
just
funny.
we were talking about movie posters earlier, but these weren't the ones that I did for the actual movies. These were just private commissions from an
Hmm.
individual. I did a few of them where they just hung them up in their home theater. And they just paid me to create them for them. They wanted caricature versions of popular movie posters. So
Right.
I had a really good time doing these, and I'm very proud of them. They're just, because I was able to sort of back engineer the techniques and the surface quality of like the textures and the painting that was in the original movie poster. I had to figure out how to get the Elvish writing in there and compile everything all together, and then do all the billing block at the bottom with the titles and credits. That's all sort of I had to do that by hand, and I had to find out what font was used. So it was a fun detective, project where I had to figure out how things were done and how to accomplish it. I have another one here that I did for the client. There was a Star Wars one I did, and this Lord of the Rings, and then I also did the Matrix here for him. Uh, anyway,
That's cool.
just fun little pieces. So just tried to honor the original movie poster, but uh,
Yeah.
caricature it. Stuff would be kind of fun to look at.
That's
Anyways,
that looks like fun, dude. That looks like a fun stuff to work on for sure. Because
yeah.
it's like reinterpreting. Yeah. So cool. I'm actually curious. In your line of work, do you do more of sort of like uh, offline commissions where you go to the events and you work, almost working live, or it's more of like online work where you get commissions from clients and then you get deadlines and you just work from your own studio.
Well, I spend more time in the studio, but more of my income comes from the parties, which is kind of a nice balance because the parties are just a few hours at a time, sometimes a couple days if I'm doing a trade show.
Right.
Um, and sometimes I go out of town, in other cities to do them. And so I don't know. It's just I guess the time wise, it breaks down. It's very irregular my schedule. I mean, I sometimes get 2 weeks off without an event at all, and then I can work on personal projects or a commission that I've had sitting on my desk for a while. But yeah, I mean, I definitely could do more commissions. I don't do a whole lot of them. I
Right.
price myself a little higher than the average bear, I guess, just because I know how much time I put into each
Yeah.
one, even if it's a simple like watercolor sketch. And maybe it's not so simple. I mean, I do a lot of sketches to prepare for it, and I refine it, and I do iterations until it's actually good, and then I spend a while actually painting it. And there's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes. So I don't do quickie style caricatures when I'm in the studio at all because I don't like to. I like to really make something look as
Yeah.
best as I can, as good as I can in the studio. When I'm working live, those are 2 or 3 minute sketches, and each person gets in the chair and gets out, and it's a form of live entertainment more than a form of art, really. Much like a
Right.
magician or DJ or something, it's kind of like a magic trick. But I have fun. I do have fun doing the live stuff. But my passion really is in the studio and painting. I love oil painting. I think most of all. I do a lot of plein air painting. I do portraits for people sometimes, like straight up portraits with no
Hmm.
exaggeration. I'm actually working on a commission right now for somebody, and they actually wanted me to paint from one of their old photos that to them always looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, and I kind of agree it does. I actually can't talk about it. It's a gift for someone about what it is, but so they want me to reproduce Norman Rockwell's painting style. So I'm
Got
doing
it.
it on a linen canvas and working on it from the photo, and it's a great time. I really enjoy doing that most of all. As far as that's what I get my most passionate feelings about when I'm sitting in the studio. But I'd love to switch more to doing fine art and traditional art and caricature paintings in the studio and do less of the live entertainment because while it's good money, it doesn't entrance me as much as sitting in front of the painting easel.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess when you work in the studio, you also have like, more freedom to experiment and really try things. There's actually one of the questions that sort of relates to that, which is, what do you think about illustration style trends going in circles? Basically, you can see you're seeing same stuff over and over and over again. It doesn't seem like it's progressing in any of the direction. It's more like stagnant. Do you have that feeling when you look at illustrations or what students are doing or professionals are doing?
Um, I mean, I guess that's not an observation I've noticed. I mean, I've seen an evolution over history, from, the golden age of illustration on, to branch out into all these different styles that are now acceptable, from,
Mm-hmm.
the level of drawing from, simplistic graphic style illustrations to, the fantasy rich illustrations like Frank Frazetta or the Dean Cornwell's. There's still a market for that. There's basically a market for everything now.
Yeah.
And I guess there was a time when certain styles were more in vogue. Like the thing that comes to mind is the Drew Struzan posters that were so popular. But in the '80s, they kind of reached their peak, and then all these other copycat artists started doing that. Well, studios probably wanted that, but didn't want to pay Drew Struzan prices, and so that style sort of, you know, petered out. Even though I still
Mm-hmm.
love looking at his artwork, I wish they would bring back that style, honestly, because there's not enough of it. There's too much digital photo montages and movie posters these days, and it's kind of sad because the Drew Struzans of the world, even the copycats, were doing pretty good work.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe that will come back and cycle around to be more popular again. Um, but yeah, I guess I don't have a lot of insight as to the world of illustration and the different styles because I'm not super plugged into that. I mean, I don't flip through magazines or get on a lot of the online, the deviant arts or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it's going on. I mean, I'm just kind of in a little bubble here, and I see stuff on social media posted by people I know and that I follow. Yeah, so I guess I don't really expose myself to a whole range of artistic styles in
Right.
illustration that
Makes
really have a
sense. Makes sense. Yeah. To me, it's an intriguing question because I think I agree with the. It was actually a question asked by Anastasia, and I agree with her observation, especially when it comes to entertainment design. It seems like it's like a copy of a copy of of a remix of a remix almost. Like everything seems to be, and I'm guilty of it too. I'm not gonna lie. The kinds of work that I'm doing, although I'm trying to be as creative with my work specifically and try different things as I can, at the end of the day, I know it's pretty much the same medium all the time. So it's more stagnant than, let's say, if you look at the history of art and and you look at the difference between medieval art versus Renaissance, right? When the Renaissance is just so vastly different and more realistic or better. Or when you look at Baroque, kind of style, or even Impressionists, which completely deviates from the realism, right? So those styles, as they were developing, they were becoming so distinctive to one another, that you could tell, oh yeah, it's completely different. Whereas now, today, it's almost like, I guess all of the ground's been covered, or
Mm-hmm.
most of the ground's been covered, and it's really hard to find something that will just break through as completely new and fresh. I almost believe that it will come through mostly through hardware and software development and new ways of how art is delivered to us, or how the medium is changing, whether it's VR or AR or any things like that. It's a wonderful painting, dude.
Oh, thanks.
Very
I did
very
that.
timely.
Yeah, I released it on election day last year when it was still up in the air as to who was going to win. So I don't know how that turned out.
Now we all know.
Mhm.
Another question was, let's see, um, trying to read through the comments. Have you ever looked at shows like Family Guy or American Dad for shape inspiration, or research characters made by creators like Mike Judge, Matt Groening, Seth I'm so bad with names. Seth MacFarlane,
Mhm.
etc., etc.
I love those cartoons. I mean, I grew up watching Simpsons, and of course, Family Guy now is, I think, funnier. Um, but no, I don't really. That's not really in my area of interest for
Hmm.
how I want to draw or paint. So I just watch them, and I'm a consumer of that kind of entertainment, but I don't really incorporate it at all or look for inspiration. I do admire sometimes when they get someone like on The Simpsons, like a celebrity, and they try to draw them in The Simpsons style. But in a way that captures their likeness. It's not always successful because
Yeah.
people in the Simpsons world don't have chins, and it's hard to get a likeness when you're locked into that one style. So maybe if I wanted to be an animator on The Simpsons, I would study that. But I don't have a need to. I just enjoy what they produce, and I mean, I do find inspiration in very different areas, though. Like I love the different styles of illustration art out there, and even if I don't necessarily incorporate it into my work, it still influences me. I think somewhat. Like John Cash is a really fantastic caricature illustrator who does these very smooth, very refined looking watercolors, and they're almost
Hmm.
graphic, but they're still rendered and shaded in a nice way. But they're so the impact of them is so great because they're so simple that they just stand out against the white background. And sometimes I try to incorporate that into the way I design the silhouette of a figure standing against a white background. But I also love the realism and delicacy that someone like Jeremy Lipkin, a fine artist, puts into his oil paintings. And so I've always got these battling influences coming into my brain about how I want my work to look. It's like I think sometimes I want to paint like Lipkin today, or sometimes I want to
Yeah,
be
lip
more
king
like
is great.
Cash. And it's yeah. So I mean, whenever I paint, it's always a battle in my head of all my influences are bouncing around that are all vastly different styles. So maybe in that sense, you should probably limit the number of artists you look towards for influence, or maybe focus on one style for a while. Like maybe if Rockwell inspires you for a while, do some paintings in the style of Rockwell, do some actual studies of his paintings, and try to
Yeah.
copy them. And then move on to someone like Frank Frazetta or Jeffrey Jones or Craig Mullins, and try to paint like them for a while. And a teacher once told me that your artistic influences, are sort of like um, the hammer marks of a sculptor working a metal sculpture. Every influence is going to come tap its influence into a different way, into their own way, to the point where, in the end, you'll be this. Using the analogy of the metal sculpture, you'll be a result of all those different influences working together into this new style.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And the more you can limit sort of your exposure towards one specific influence and maybe focus on the things that are very unorthodox, the more sort of diverse your style becomes, right? So that's something that I've been saying quite a lot. It's like I personally stopped looking. I do look at sites like DeviantArt and ArtStation mostly to just admire art rather than find inspiration. I almost rarely ever look at other artists' work anymore when it comes to creating my own work. I used to do that a lot because like I always like let's find some really cool concepts that inspire me and maybe somehow I'll come up with with an idea to what I'm doing. And it's a very easy or it's an easier, lazier way of creating your own art because then you're sort of like relying on those shortcuts that you're hoping for. Whereas when you're like trying to remove that noise and really try to find true inspiration to what you need to do, that's when it becomes challenging. So looking into nature, for instance, is always usually better in terms of the results because then you start to understand a little more about the world itself as well. You get to understand function and expression, all of those things that matter for your art to grow, basically. And yeah, it's very similar to what you're saying, though. Yeah, it's like maybe stop looking at those cartoons because it might just turn out that your work's gonna look like that at the end of the day. So agree with that. Agree with that. Cool. Think we can wrap it up here. There's maybe one or two more questions, but they're very similar to what we've been talking about, and some of the questions have been answered by just mere fact of our conversation. So, dude, it's been fun. It was very nice to meet you. In the first place, I should thank John and Proco for introducing myself to you because for me, it's a different world, and it's been sort of a refreshing experience to talk with someone who's not in the industry that I work in. It's always sort of like my idea is just to talk with as many people as I can and try to find out where are the inspirations coming from, what are the similarities and differences, and I can tell there's like some common grounds that we fall into in terms of foundation and whatnot. And it seems to me like your industry is not really that far off, or what you do, it's not really that far off to what I do. It's just like a slightly different perspective that makes it feel like it's a vastly different thing. So It's very very interesting experience for me for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's just like, listening to someone talk who's doing something slightly different from what you're doing can be sort of inspiring in just
Yeah.
the ideas, concepts that are presented. Not necessarily that you wanted someone's going to rush off and do caricatures now, but attitudes maybe I have, or a perspective on something can help. Like, I love listening to podcasts where like maybe a musician is being interviewed and they're talking about how to deal with online trolls, or finding inspiration for their music. That's lessons and advice I find extremely valuable, even if it's not directly related to what I'm
Yeah.
doing in my work.
Do you
And
have
it's
any
all,
podcasts that you would recommend? Do you like listening to podcasts, by the way? Just out of
I'm really a
curiosity.
creature of habit. Once I find one, I latch onto it, and I don't really listen to others. But mostly I listen to the Nerdist of
Okay.
Chris Hardwick. It's just he has such interesting guests on and really long, interesting conversations on a variety of subjects. And then I listen to, it's kind of nerdy, but I listen to the Away with Words podcast, their
Mm-hmm.
radio show actually on public radio, where they talk about language and word origins and phrases. And that's just not really related to art at all. I just find it interesting and entertaining, and yeah.
That's really
um,
cool. That's really cool. One I got really hooked into. Apart from Radio Lab, that is probably one of my favorites of all time. I guess Joe Rogan podcast is up there as well, but Radio Lab has really, it's more like a scientific oriented podcast that they have so many interesting topics. But the most recent one that I found really interesting, it's mostly because of running my own business, running my own art school, online art school, is How I Built This from NPR, where they invite CEOs and people who founded those really successful companies to talk about their origins, how they built their businesses, and what they went through. And it's kind of funny because almost everything we've talked about today, when it comes to practice and plateaus and failing and sort of like finding the reward after hundreds of failures, it just like resonates so directly with those people, like people the guy who started, let's say, Whole Foods. He went through so many nightmares for so many years before he even succeeded and actually built, the brand that he wanted to build. It's just like very interesting parallels, even though there's a completely different businesses and completely different sort of branches of life. I find it really interesting, very sort of mind expanding. So definitely good recommendation. I'm gonna try out Nerdist and the other one you talked about. I'm probably gonna re-listen to our stream to find out what exactly that was, because I'm always interested in looking for new things. But what I wanted to do is thank you for joining the stream. Thanks for
yeah,
accepting the invitation. Was really fun to talk with you. And
thank you.
yeah.
I should actually mention, Stan will probably kill me if I don't, that my part 2 of my caricature course, the more advanced lessons,
Uh
are
huh.
going to be released soon, and we're actually about to start the pre-sale, where until I think it's June 26th, you can get part 2 for a pretty decent discount. After that, it jumps back up to normal price. So
Cool.
the fundamental course, the part 1 is already all on YouTube. They're on YouTube. You watch them for free, and part 2 is also going to be released on YouTube.
So
But of
where
course,
where the audience can find this? Would it be on
yeah,
Proco's channel or?
it's on the Proco channel on
Okay.
YouTube. Yeah, and then of course, if you want to get more in-depth lessons and additional demonstrations and more and longer student critique videos, they're going to be on the proco.com/caricature website.
Okay.
So that's
I'll
coming
make
out
sure
soon.
those links are included in the description for people to know. Cool. Good plug. I suggest looking into those because I really like your work. I mean, people could see what you did here, or the examples that you were showing here. Those are great, by the way. I
Oh,
really
thanks.
like your work, and I like your approach. It's very 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 solid, and it's good to learn that stuff. So cool. All right, let's wrap it up, guys. Thanks for listening, joining in, and being here with us. And till the next time.